Hello, everybody.
Well, good evening. Full house tonight. I like it. So you guys excited, ready to detox?
Welcome.
A lot of people get a bad idea of detox. They think they're going to starve to death, get sick, and puke everywhere.
And spend a lot of time in the bathroom.
Yeah, not to mention the D word. The D word is what? Go ahead, say it out loud. What is it?
Diarrhea.
So we're going to talk about all the aspects of detox. It's going to be awesome. A lot of people don't understand that detoxification is a 24/7, 365 process. We must understand the aspects of it because it can keep us alive. What do I mean by that? If we get toxins backed up in our system, we're going to get sicker and sicker and sicker, and toxicity is always a part of those diseases called cancers. So we need to learn to detox effectively. So tonight we're going to go through a lot of information. It's going to be fun, it's going to be fast-paced, and you guys are going to have a good time, we believe. You ready to go? Yes. All right. Okay, here we go.
So we always start with objectives, right? We have a lot of information to cover, and we'll systematically go over each and every one of these things, and we will give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you have for those of you that are in-house tonight. Number one, we're going to define what a toxicant is and how to recognize their increasing exposure in our environment. We're going to evaluate the health consequences of exposure to the chronic low-level load of toxic load that we carry today. We're going to analyze the process of detoxification and what that means in your body. It's actually a process called biotransformation, and how we may actually optimize it by going through this process of detoxification. And then we're going to implement a foundational and effective detoxification plan or program for us all to go through together.
Now, a lot of times we think about detox, we think about the concept of change. So we wanted to give you a thought-provoking statement tonight to sort of really analyze. So I'm going to read this, and I want you to think about the words. When the pain of change, pain of where one is outweighs the pain of change, one will change. I think we'd all agree with that, right? So the motivation to change, though sometimes driven extrinsically, must take root intrinsically or inside of us for the motivation to actually produce fruit, and that being tangible actions that yield results. So results, when we talk about this, simply are consequences of actions driven by owning your why. Everybody say why.
Why?
If you don't own your why, if it's never owned, change will never result. We always make changes based upon a why. There's always a reason. Some people have to find reasons for health, which I hope is the reason. We find reasons for spousal support, for life, to be a good example, etc., etc. There's always things that overarch why what we do. So it's important to get this why defined very intrinsically so that we'll get truly motivated to put actions, because a lot of people talk, but few put the actions behind those words. It's all about defining the why and letting that why guide you forward in life to whatever you want to achieve.
So a little bit about toxins and their far-reaching consequences. Toxins are more than just out and outright unnatural molecules. Each exposure that you have to a toxin has not only an individual effect, but it's interrelated and synergistic, has a synergistic effect with other toxins. And this is really the external and internal load, and it's called the persistent organic pollutant load. So we're all undergoing this each and every day, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 1,440 minutes in a 24-hour period of time. So this exposure is tied to disease. That's the most important thing. The disease processes in each person's body and their ability to handle it is different. So you have a unique capacity in your body to handle a toxic load. So we're going to go over some of these SNPs that you genetically may or may not carry later in the presentation, which may reveal your body's ability to deal with a toxic load. So bottom line is, each toxin, both known and unknown toxins, require a great deal of your body's energy to handle it. So it's up to us to know these toxins and to limit them and their exposure. So here's a few not so fun facts. Since World War II, over 85,000 synthetic chemicals have been registered with the Environmental Protection Agency. Shouldn't the EPA be protecting us? 140K chemicals are on the European market. Just interesting to note. Each year, an estimated 2,000 new chemicals are introduced for use in everyday items that we use every single day, including food, pesticides, personal care products, things we put on our skin, in our hair, on our eyes, bathe in, our prescription drugs. We don't stop to think that there are chemicals in those prescription drugs. Household cleaners are another example. Pesticides that we spray on crops. These are all other examples. Our lawn care products. Roughly 3,000 synthetic chemicals are manufactured in high production volume. More than 1 million pounds of each chemical are produced or imported into the United States every single year. We're importing those into the States. So it seems quite silly that it would be allowed, but it's important to remember that the EPA sets what are called acceptable levels. It's a point which bears the question, why is any amount acceptable to all when each of us can handle a substantially different quantity of toxin?
Now, a real, I quote, widespread, end quote, problem. Roundup. How many have heard of Roundup? Roundup's an herbicide sprayed upon crops. Today, it's sprayed upon over 95% of all, everyone say all, 95% of all grains, bread, products, corns, and soy. It's also used as a desiccant on the preparation of ground to put oats. Now, interesting enough, what does Roundup do? It kills weeds, right? We know that. There's two problems with this. Number one, the seeds of those crops that I just named have been genetically modified to withstand the effects of Roundup. Makes sense, doesn't it? Because ultimately, the bottom line is we want to produce more crop. So it's going to kill everything except that. Increasing the yield, which is good for the person that's growing the crop and selling it. Unfortunately, there's a side problem here. Not to mention the genetic modification, and by the way, this will freak you out, a little fun tidbit that's not on part of the slide. The wheat kernel has 6 times more DNA than a human being. Crazy to think about. How many times does that need to be modified over the course of a few years to look nothing like its original state? Can you think of mutant human beings running around? We have mutant seeds running around, and this stuff is in our lives, in our mouths, in our bodies for the first time in history. That ought to make you take a deep breath and go, time out a minute. But that's not the only problem. The second problem is Roundup contains one of its main chemicals called glyphosate. Now, glyphosate is actually the main ingredient that kills things. But glyphosate has major chemical issues with it. It actually kills our gut bacteria. It destroys our brain, and it causes cancer. And it gets in the soil, and the soil, because Roundup is liquid, begins to yield it into the crops through the root structure. So now we have corn, soy, breads, and grain products, and now some oats that are full of glyphosate. Next time you put that stuff in your mouth, thinking about the chips and dip and all that kind of stuff, all you're thinking is, here's one more bite of cancer that's going to become me. Now, we're going to talk about it later. You are what you eat, or you are what you can't eliminate. So you want to think about this process as you go forward. This is one of the big time problems we have today in our world. We're going to talk a lot about this Roundup dilemma as we go forward. Now, this is not just in the U.S. I found this very interesting. Now, you can kind of look around this particular slide, and you're going to see countries present. Now, not all countries, get this, use Roundup on the crops. Not all countries. So the question becomes is, how do people from 18 countries around the world get this glyphosate / Roundup in their bodies? Because they tested urine on these people. Isn't it crazy? Unfortunately, we know that Roundup usage has increased over time, and it parallels the same amount of deaths from GI dysfunction as well as cancers. It's went up, so it correlates really well with celiac disease. And how many have heard of celiac disease? It goes right up with it. And unfortunately, all this food has been shipped around the world through the process called the standard American diet, right? So I think we need to talk and take the T off of that word and call it the standard American. That's kind of what it is. Our lifestyle is built upon that. So when we see these amounts of foods around the world, we're seeing huge amounts of this pesticide and these herbicides getting into other people. And it originated right here because everybody wants to be like America. America's done a really good job of showing people what not to do originally. Now, you may not be familiar with the term glyphosate, but it actually is a glycine mimicker. Now, glycine is an amino acid that's used to do a lot of things in our body. So when we're talking about mimicker, it acts like it takes the place of. So think about that. It takes the place of something called glycine. It's essential, get this, for muscle, cognitive, and metabolic functions. Question for you. Are people acting stupid these days? I'm serious. Are the same people that are acting stupid and flat out evil, I see we got law enforcement officers here, are the people that are doing those things snacking on salads or processed foods? We have to really think about this and look at our nutritional program is killing people because it's not nutritional at all. So when you're talking about this amino acid glycine, it's essential for all these functions. It helps break down and transports nutrients like glycogen and fat to be used in cells for energy. So if we don't have that ability to transport fat to be used as energy, what's going to happen to it? Is it going to get stored? It's not going to get used, it's going to get stored, and that limits, or that sort of links itself to the obesity crisis. So in the human body, glycine is normally found in high concentration, and keep in mind, glyphosate is a mimicker, so one of the key amino acids used to also form collagen. So we start to see structural issues, more joints torn, knees messed up, etc., etc. If that's not enough, and this will blow your mind, the trends of autism, a brain disorder, a neurotoxicity disorder are staggering. 40 years ago, it was 1 in 40,000 births. Today, it's 1 in 40. I hope you're sitting down and stay sitting down, because in 2050, it's predicted to be 1 in 2. I'm going to say that one more time because I want to get your attention. In 2050, the rates of autistic births in the U.S. are 1 in 2. Tell me this junk needs to be out of our system forever. We don't need to eat it. We don't need to have it. We don't need to play around. It's not a playing issue anymore. People are suffering, and we're losing a generation ahead of us because we're being so, I'll use this term, rebellious. We don't want to change because we don't believe it. Now, we can line up data all day long, and because you came tonight, you're responsible now. So the question is, what will you do with that, right? Because this is the truth. And if anybody wants some more data, we can get it all the way from MIT if you would like. We have all of Dr. Stephanie Seneff's stuff, which is cool. She's an expert in this.
So a minute ago, we talked about the total body burden. This is a study that was done at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York. And they studied the body burden of toxicants in individuals that were volunteers. They didn't even work in the factory or around chemicals or work with chemicals. And what they found was 167 chemical pollutants was noted in their blood and urine. And these people were just volunteers. So, question is are low levels of toxicants like nanograms or picograms, these teeny tiny measurements, are they significant? Why does a little bit go so far? We should be asking ourselves the question, 1 little Diet Coke? Are small little acceptable levels really acceptable in live human beings and vital systems? We want your mind to begin to think about detoxification pathways, biotransformation, and cellular health. You know, you're made up of millions and billions of cells that you can't see. Eye cells, hair cells, liver cells, kidney cells, and detoxification is working every single second of the day. But if your constitution is a little bit weak, or a nutrient is not there, or your system is out without reserve because it's stressed out, then what? Then what?
So the dose of these toxicants in our population may be more significant than we think. It's an interesting question to pose, isn't it, about acceptable levels? I mean, are there really thresholds below which no adverse effects occur? You got to think about that for a second, because when they say if something is safe or not, all they're testing is that little bit of one thing, And maybe that little bit of one thing doesn't cause too much. But when you compare that little bit of one thing and combine it with another little bit of one thing and another little bit of one thing, it stacks up over the course of time. So what is the one little thing that sends it over the edge like a septic system? And that's kind of how we have to think. Everything matters. We need to look at the whole load versus the individual thing. Think of a garbage dump. Over the course of time, if the garbage dump gets full, do we ever remember what's at the bottom? But that becomes very significant if what's at the bottom is starting to smolder and rot and cause problems. So the deeper you go with that, the sicker you can become. So we need to think about all of that and keeping sort of our septic systems clean.
So where does the rubber meet the road? It's in chronic low levels of toxicity. Oftentimes we have the ability to adapt, but then biological effects of many toxicants are not linear. Eventually, very low levels have very profound effects, very profound physiological effects. And chemical sensitivities can vary considerably individual to individual depending upon your genetic makeup, the genes that you were born with. And just because you were born with a certain set of genes does not necessarily mean those genes need to go in the wrong direction. We just need to learn how to treat those genes and treat them right. So we know we're all different. It's our assertion that the difference of our uniqueness must be considered when we're looking and reevaluating toxic load and exposure. Plus, we've all met different stressors in our lives, from personal health crises to emotional health crises to life crises, simply the stressors of life. They're all additive. That's an additive, persistent, organic, pollutant load that we deal with every single day. So, food for thought. What typically will happen is smart chemists will develop a new product, see that it is useful and it has useful properties, they massage it around, and they put it into consumer goods, and the chemical then gets disseminated widely in the marketplace. You've all seen this. And typically, 10 or 15 or 20 more years later, scientists begin to realize that this chemical is really quite toxic. So
now we look at individual toxin. Case in point, DDT is good for me. This stuff is banned now. It's a synthetic compound that was used as an insecticide. How many remember DDT? Unfortunately, it tends to persist in the environment. And guess where it gets stored? Right in the fat tissue. It's going to be very important. Most toxins are called lipophilic. In other words, they love fat. They reside there. They sort of live there. It's like the Tom Bodett Motel 6 commercial, leaving a light on for you. There's always a room for it there waiting to happen. So we mention this because, as Dr. Michelle quoted that wonderful last slide, if it was toxic and poisonous in the first place, why was it ever allowed? It's because we don't think about the consequences. And this gets us thinking about our own consequences. All of us have done and said toxic, dumb things before. We wish we could take those back. Now this is sort of empowering us to put better things in our mouth so that we don't have to think about taking it back, because you can't. Once it's in, it's gone. Okay?
So what about BPA? We've all heard about BPA. It's a plasticizer. And over 8 billion pounds are produced every single year to line our cans, if they're in plastic bottles, of the things we drink, and even, this will blow your mind, cash register receipts. Every time you touch a cash register receipt, you're exposed to bisphenol A. So over 100 tons of this stuff is released into the atmosphere every year. Isn't that mysterious? It's readily absorbed through our skin. So all of the things that, the cosmetics and things that have BPA in it, guess where it's going? Right through our skin. In fact, heated plastics, when you heat those plastics in microwaves, the delivery of BPA into a substance is exponentially elevated. So microwaving, heating, leaving water bottles in a heated car increases your exposure to BPA. The most notable effect of BPA is that it is an endocrine disruptor, meaning that it disrupts your endocrine system, your thyroid system, your adrenal system, your male and female sex gland system. we kind of have a tendency to believe that BPA has also contributed to that flat line that we see in cancer these days. In fact, over the last 40 years, things haven't really changed. That's right. It's a war that we're not winning.
Interestingly enough, BPA has been linked to obesity as well in children. The beat goes on, as we say, and a lot of people don't get that BPA exposure. It also causes your body to store fat. It activates these, they're called peroxisomes in the fat cells to sort of take up and store fat. So that's what they do. The more exposure to BPA, even from receipts, etc., like that, actually will cause us to store more of these toxins overall in our body, which can become very problematic. So we need to be very cautious of what is around us with these endocrine disrupting chemicals. So even the World Health Organization said it in 2012. They recognize we need to reduce exposure to BPA. And to make this happen, we first got to realize there's a problem. And we've defined the problem clearly, but we made a conscious effort to describe this thing piece by piece. And then once we have the problem clearly defined, we have to say, well, that's true, and then it becomes on us what we're going to do about it. We know rather than having the exposure on the decline, it's actually on the rise. And we know endocrine-related disorders are also on the rise. We know genetics are not the sole cause because genetics have only changed 2% in 10,000 years. Therefore, to blame it on genes is really a level of ridiculousness because it doesn't work. What's changed rapidly over the course of the years is the toxic and the toxicity of the environment. So we must guard this next generation, and many times we allow our children to be exposed to these things because we don't think about it, because we don't think it hurts them. But I believe right at the time they're little is the time they're most sensitive, because as we know, as we get older, things don't work quite as well. The organ systems will wear out. So the longer they're exposed to these toxins over the course of time, the less their system will be able to deal with them later in life. Make sense?
So what is a xenobiotic? We hear this word all the time. Xenobiotic is simply a chemical substance that is foreign to life, that are detected by or in your body. So what are they? They're everywhere. Check out this list. You might want to take a picture of this list and go home and look to see how many of these things that you're actually exposed to. Pesticides. They're on what we buy in the market. Our veggies, our fruits. Plasticizers, our water bottles, our cans are lined with these things. Industrial pollutants, things that are in the air that we breathe. Petrochemicals and fuels and solvents. What about pigments, paints, dyes, perfumes? We all wear some sort of a perfume or cologne, or it's in the air when we walk into a building. Preservatives and flame retardants. And what about the last P? Pharmaceuticals. By the way, a plasticizer, what is it? It's a substance that's typically a solvent that's added to a synthetic resin to produce or promote plasticity and flexibility and to reduce brittleness, like in your plastic bottles.
So we're going to introduce this term tonight called exposome. And exposome is really just a combination of all our exposures combined. So we all have different levels of exposures in our own lives, our homes, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to begin to look at what that is, because they're all going to affect us internally. These are external exposures, but they affect us eventually internally.
Wrapping your brain around the exposome, all of your exposures, we are hit from all angles. The external environment exposes us to radiation. Of course, it exposes us to stress. Lifestyle, everybody has a different lifestyle. Some of us are under more socioeconomic pressures than others. Infections, viral, bacterial infections, drugs, the type of lifestyle that we live. The standard American lifestyle is pollution, 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 and more pollution. Our own internal environment makes toxins. It's rusting at a rapid rate unless we keep the antioxidants at a certain level. It's inflamed if we can't put out the fire. Our body is undergoing lipid peroxidation, oxidative stress, age-glycosylated end products from sugars that we take in. Our gut flora actually can produce toxic chemicals as an end product. You know, they're live, little, teeny, tiny cells that are in your system doing their magic work. and they can be toxic. So the exposome, we have to think of the sum total of everything that we're exposed to.
So when you look at this, we used to say, "We are what you eat." How many have heard that expression before? But we need to make this go beyond that. You are what you eat, what you drink, what you breathe, what you touch, and what you can't eliminate. The body has this unique ability to handle some stuff. I know we've painted the picture of toxins everywhere, like Buzz Lightyear said. They really are. But when you look at the big picture, it's really looking at the total toxic load, which is a simple equation. It's the total toxic exposure minus your ability to biotransform. Now, biotransformation, we're going to talk about that in a minute. That's transforming it to a substance that's able to be urinated out or out into the fecal matter. So it's the total toxic exposure minus your ability to biotransform and excrete or eliminate toxins. So we're going to take you through that process. It's a really cool process, and it goes on in all of us at this very moment. Pretty darn cool.
So buckle up your seatbelts. Let's talk about biotransformation or detoxification. There are multiple components of biotransformation, and this process is constantly active in your system right now. You are detoxifying in the moment. This process is very ATP dependent, meaning that it requires a lot of energy. And to make that energy, your body requires a lot of very specific nutrients. So if we're nutrient deficient, we're not making energy to biotransform or detoxify chemicals and pollution. It's polymorphic, meaning that you have an individual interindividuality based on your genetics. So not everybody detoxifies at the same rate. If you have a SNP that is absent, it means that perhaps that phase of detoxification is a little bit slow. The awesome thing is we can measure that and help it out. Detoxification can be additive, as we've talked about. The persistent organic pollutant load adds up through redundant and multiple substrate or substances that actually pass through your organs. Your liver is a precious organ that's working for you right now. And your kidneys are their precious organs that are working for you right now. And a lot of things are competing to go through those pathways right now. So we've got to find ways to help improve the function of the liver and the kidneys through phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism to aid elimination of toxins. So let's talk about detoxification and the steps. We're going to talk about mainly 2 steps tonight. However, there are many more. In the liver, there is phase 1. Phase 1 is referred to as the oxidative or reductive phase. What that means is that your body is taking in all of these chemicals and it has to process everything. And it's going to go through phase 1 and become highly reactive. It's like a fire, it's like a flame. It's hot and it's got to be reduced through phase 2. So phase 2 is called the conjugation phase, where these highly reactive molecules are reduced or quieted. The fire is put out so that the body can take these angry molecules and eliminate them. If your body gets stuck in phase 1, it's highly reactive and it's causing damage in real time to your system. Or your body will offload it into the fat cells and hide it until it's got enough of the nutrients that it needs to go to the next step. So these lipophilic or fat-loving compounds must be chemically altered by your body into hydrophilic or water-loving molecules so that your body can eliminate it through your kidneys. It's an awesome process to know that this is going on every single second of the day.
So here's a great picture of it. And I want you to kind of see this and imagine what's happening. So when we talk about the parent compound, we're talking about something that's been generated inside the body or brought into the body from the outside, whether intentionally or not. But it's a compound that's going to be a toxin. It's going to be looked at by the body as a foreign invader. So the foreign invader comes in phase 1 through these processes you've got listed here, as Dr. Michelle mentioned: oxidation, reduction, and hydrolysis. They sort of transform this parent compound into something a little more pissed off. Yes, I said that word. So they're mad coming in, and then they're even more mad. So it's like a ball bearing that comes in. You know, you can't stick something on a ball bearing unless you rough it up a little bit, right? You can't glue something onto it. This is going to become pertinent to our discussion. So they come in like a ball bearing, but you have to rough them up. So the roughing up process is really phase one. They end up very roughed up right there in the center where they have these activated intermediates. And this is where they're really problematic. If they don't get picked up and grabbed by something and pulled out into this water soluble, now they're being transformed. If they don't get pulled out of the body at that point, they go right back in the body and they're worse off than when they came in. This is phase two. You see all those processes right there, starting with glucuronylyl transferase. I won't go into those biochemical enzymes there, but know that they act like bouncers. So the intermediate is there, it's really mad, and the bouncer, phase two, grabs it and says, you come on with me and we're going to the toilet. That's kind of what happens. So you need to make sure you have plenty of bouncers in your life. You get the idea. Communicate analogies so you get this. Phase one is about preparation for elimination. Phase two is about having the bouncer grab a stubborn guy in the bar who's creating a scene and acting like a fool and pulling him outside forever. Makes sense? And outside for us is into the toilet. That's where the toxins go.
So what must happen is your body has to take a fat-soluble toxin and pull it into the liver, and it takes a lot of energy to go through phase one. And not only does it take a lot of energy to go through oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis, it takes a lot of nutrients. And you can see that it takes vitamin B2, B3, B6, B12, methylfolate, glutathione, which is your body's most potent antioxidant, and even flavonoids. So then it takes it into that highly reactive intermediate, and it's got to be reduced. And that happens in phase two. Well, guess what? Phase two also takes a lot of energy, and that energy is nutrient dependent. That phase is nutrient dependent. It's got to have certain nutrients like cysteine, which is an amino acid, methionine, another amino acid, glutathione. You see that potent antioxidant twice, once in phase one and again in phase two. You see your B vitamins, B5, B12, glutamine, choline, taurine, and glycine, all necessary to complete phase two. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't evaluate every label every single day to see if I'm getting all of those nutrients. What's happening to phase one and phase two if we're not paying attention? Do you think it actually easily goes through phase one, phase two, and out, that it's eliminated as water-soluble waste? Or is our body hanging around waiting until those nutrients are actually available to upregulate the process of elimination? So look closely at the nutrient dependency of each one of these phases, phase one and phase two.
And if you have imbalanced detoxification, this is what it looks like. So when the nonpolar xenobiotic, which remember is foreign to life or foreign to the body, comes in, that bad guy comes in the body, your system internally in that phase one CYP P450 is a genetic system that we're all different in. It is activated. It says, oh my gosh, we've got an intruder. I'm going to upregulate. That's why you see the arrow going up. I'm going to upregulate, and I'm going to make this toxin into a reactive. So it gets worse. You see that start area in the middle. But what if you didn't have enough nutrients, enough bouncers, and the nutrients, by the way, are cofactors to make the bouncers work, like spark plugs. If you don't have those, your phase two, your bouncer stage, is going to downregulate. So the toxins are becoming stacked up right there in the center. They get recirculated, and you see what they cause. Damage to DNA, RNA, and proteins. In other words, they cause damage to cells. And if the body can't repair the damage fast enough, we end up getting permanent cell damage, which can result in tumors that can become carcinogenic. I'll use the example of George Burns, who smoked cigarettes for years or whatever he smoked. He didn't get cancer. That was weird, huh? He must have had some weird genes that actually upregulated the process of breaking that carcinogenic molecule down. But it was very unusual, right? Because most people that smoke cigarettes end up getting lung cancer. They stack up these reactive intermediates so deep that the body can't get it out. And over the course of time, the place where they go in the lungs, in this case, because it's breathing, would cause damage that can't be repaired. Make sense? So we're trying to create a system that doesn't create a lot of damage. Even though the toxins come in, they are excreted out in a safe manner. Now, I want to look at this from kind of a macro view, and kind of ignore the stick figures, but the brain is at the top. The brain is mostly made of what kind of materials? Anybody know? Fat. So the brain is fat. Everybody say, my brain is fat. It is. So you see at the top, phase 1, look to the left side of the screen, the oxidation activation stage. Remember, phase 1 is going to phase 2. Phase 2 is the bouncers. They're grabbing them. They are pulling them into the cells. Some of them are going out the skin, a light amount. Some of them are going down into the liver. That's where most of them go. From the liver, they are transformed into those lipo, or those hydrophilic ones, the water-soluble compounds, and dumped out in the intestine all the way into the toilet. See the toilet to the right. So you see these big bold arrows going into the toilet. Now, if the circulating load, remember the toxic load becomes too much. If it becomes too much and phase 1 gets so stacked up that phase 2 can't handle it, you're going to see much less make it through the process and more be recirculated. Look at the big bold arrows. Where's it getting recirculated to? The brain. Everybody see that? The brain, the big bold arrow turning around to the brain. And if you get this continual processes of toxins coming in, you're going to get gallbladder blockage. How many people have gallbladder issues these days? And then what happens? What do? If it gets inflamed and gunked up, we just cut it out. Did that fix the process? No. What caused the process? Too much toxic overload through the standard American, not lifestyle, standard American death style. True. So we can see the liver gets blocked up and all the stuff that's supposed to go out the liver with the gallbladder's help into the small intestine and out through the colon eventually into the toilet. It gets recirculated where again? To the what? The brain, which is made of what? Fat. Very good. So we know toxins that don't get pushed out are fat lovers. Pretty interesting. And the beat goes on. Now, GI inflammation is increased. And we start making what's called lipopolysaccharides. You don't need to know the name, just know LPS is gunk from the gut. And that gunk from the gut gets out into circulation as well, and it also gets recirculated to, guess what? The brain, which is made of what? So you're getting it now. These inflammatory and their pro-inflammatory signals, they're going to block this detoxification completely. They're going to downregulate all of your detox enzymes because your body's trying to do everything just to survive at this point. And your transporters out into the toilet are going to get shut down. And look at the list of substances to the right that increase this gut gunk, as we say. Look at all those. Interesting, isn't it? How many people take NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, on a regular basis? How many people have celiac disease? How many people have inflammatory bowel disease? How many people have stress? Isn't that awesome? Did you know stress affects gut bacteria? Stress can affect detox. Intense exercise also creates a little bit of permeability in the gut. Very important to know. So athletes that exercise, we're not saying don't exercise, we're actually saying take better care of the gut from an intensive manner. And there's that word, second from the bottom. What does that word say? Glyphosate, which is in what chemical? In Roundup. Very good. So, and we also see mercury. What is mercury infamous or famous for being inside of? Yeah, the flu shot. Very good. Okay.
So why
Fish.
is it? Yeah. So why is it some people are more sensitive or retain toxins more than others? Well, perhaps they have chronic inflammation. You know, inflammation is the precursor to all chronic sickness and disease. So inflammation is one. Oxidative stress is another one. Remember all those processes we talked about that can lead to oxidative stress or early rusting. Lack of nutrients, nutrient deficiencies stack up toxic waste. Your body can't eliminate toxic waste if it doesn't have enough nutrients to create energy to eliminate the waste. We all know that high sugar, low protein diets, also known as the standard American diet, can cause us to retain toxins because not only are they toxic, they're nutrient deficient. That type of a nutritional protocol may lead to intestinal or gut dysbiosis, or that may come from taking too many antibiotics or from having chronic infections. That can create a sensitivity to the toxic load. Some people are exposed to a high load of chemicals by where they work or what they work around. Stress is a toxin. Our thoughts can be toxic. Emotional trauma can be toxic to the system and can damage the internal workings of the system. We are all born with a certain set of genes. It doesn't mean that those genes have to be turned on, but they do have a role in phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism. And we can affect that by how we eat, breathe, and move. And the great thing is that the polymorphisms in phase 1 and phase 2 can be measured, and we can do something about that. So your history solves the mystery. So always go back to your own personal history to develop an effective plan. So your history tells the story. So look at the exposome in your own life, your home, your work environment, the stressors, all of the different things that you're exposed to 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. Your history of reactions to drugs. Drug reactions may be a persistent pollutant. Chemicals, odors, perfumes. Think about your current symptoms or complaints. Joint pains, malaise, not feeling well, brain fog. When was the last time you ever felt completely and totally well? There might be a key traumatic event that tipped you over in that pollutant load. And then, of course, we've got to go to those applicable genetic SNPs that we can measure and do something about. And those SNPs can be measured in a genetic test, and they measure the enzymes that are present in phase 1. So you can see if you upregulate phase 1 and phase 1 goes too fast. Or the genes in phase 2, the enzymes in phase 2. If the enzymes in phase 2 are missing and you have upregulated phase 1, we have a toxic system. Great news is, if that's present, we have ways that we can modulate upregulation and deficiency.
A lot of people want to know how you measure toxins, so we thought we'd just take a few seconds to tell you. You can look at hair. Hair analysis is a very common way to do it. You can look at stool analysis too. We talked about the gut gunk. You can measure that. Blood testing is important to look at. Sometimes we look at liver enzymes. If a liver enzyme is upregulated, like the liver's working too hard. We see that quite often. Oxidative stress testing, and Dr. Michelle mentioned DNA as well. It would make sense, and I want everybody to kind of grasp the DNA concept. These enzymes are key to whether phase 1 is functioning normal or faster than normal, or phase 2 is functioning normal or slower than normal. So if we have a system that's genetically functioning faster than normal at phase 1, stacking them up effectively, those intermediate reactive substances in the center, those really dangerous ones that are really, I said the word a little bit ago, so I'll say it again, they're really pissed off molecules, right? They're there. And if phase 2 is downregulated, they can stack up there very quickly, very rapidly, and build up in the system, therefore causing a lot of problems. Okay? That is a system that's going to be carcinogenic. That makes sense, right? Okay.
Carcinogenic equals cancer. So nutrition is the key. The most important medical decision that you make every single day, 365 days a year, is at the end of your fork.
Now that's a tweet for somebody, seriously. You don't miss that one.
We call that fork curls. So not just bicep curls in the gym, but the bicep curls that you do at the table. Be mindful of what you actually have at the end of your fork. Just because you're born with that certain set of genes does not mean those genes have to be turned on. It's the environment that you put on the genes with your nutrition. So genes are the loaded gun, and the environment that you put on them pulls the trigger of chronic inflammation and disease, the toxic load of disease. So nutrition can modulate that toxicity of the environmental pollutants. Isn't that cool? It's right at your fingertips. It's at the grocery store. It can be in your refrigerator. In fact, a convincing body of evidence and research indicates that nutrition is the modulator of vulnerability to environmental insults. So yes, we have to breathe this air. Yes, we have to drink polluted water or inference thereof. But we can modulate that with the nutrition that we put into our body. So it's timely to consider nutrition as a vital component to our human risk assessment. Your risk for cancer, your risk for chronic disease. Nutrition may serve as either an agonist, a helper, or an antagonist. So every time you're at the table, is this good for me or not? Is this working for me or not? Is this providing energy and nutrients or not? Evaluate your nutrition and the health impacts that are associated with what you're eating, as well as your environmental exposure.
So we've made a really concerted effort to convince you the environment's toxic. Has it worked? Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh, now what do I do? So we're going to tell you what to do. Some principles here that are general, and we're going to get into real specifics. Obviously, we got to minimize our toxic load. We've got to be hydrated. You know, the solution to pollution is dilution. That's one of the old sayings that we used to have. We need to optimize bowel health and excretion. So if we're not eliminating from the bowels on a daily basis, our bodies are backing up the toxins. And a lot of ladies have issues with that. And it's going to be perhaps because of the anatomy at some point, but it's also because of the estrogen can get backed up in there as well. So that becomes very problematic. We've got to enhance our vitamins and nutrients that come in and make good food choices. We want to think about down-regulating our inflammatory process. Certainly, whatever we can do to assist the detox process, we need to. We need to be thinking about that all the time. And ensure adequate exercise. Why does exercise do it? It makes you sweat, it makes you move, it makes things move. So that's very important to keep going. These are key points that really know.
So the awesome thing and point on this slide is that vegetables and fruit improve phase 2 response. Remember, that can be the phase that's actually downregulated. So what's on your fork can improve phase 2 detoxification. So really, it all begins with what we eat and with that 4-letter word, food. So why would we incorporate focused detox? And who should do it? Anybody that feels slow, tired, fatigued, joint aches, pain, has had the sudden onset of an autoimmune disease, IBS, gut dysfunction, or even has had a long history of constipation. Constipation equals the lack of elimination, therefore a toxic load. Anybody who has a strong history of cancer or any other inflammatory condition, heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease. Anyone who is sensitive to chemicals in the environment, perfumes, odors, scents, detergents. And anyone who's had a past medical history of an acute toxic exposure, essentially. So who should incorporate focused detox? Everyone.
This is not the optimum detox. You can read the cartoon there. It's not trying to create a parking lot to eliminate the close spots and make everybody collapse. It's not the optimum detox. I like the guy in the last part, it's too late for broccoli. It's hilarious, you know. Should we help these guys? Let's cram some broccoli down the throat. Nope, it's too late. Don't do that. But we do have a really cool process. And the process is simple. You need to know what to do. We start out very easily. We have a very streamlined, simple, and I want to say this, non-caloric restrictive process. It's very important to get. Detox is not a diet. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not. It's sort of taking inventory of what you're doing. Let us set you a plan that works and just follow it. It gives one a nice kickstart into living a life that's conducive to healthy detoxification and healthy lifestyle. That's all it is. We do put nutrients on there to help you push out those things in phase 2. All those vitamins and minerals that Dr. Michelle talked about, those are going to be included as well. So the detox sort of kit, if you want to call it, that lasts for 14 days. It's really a cool process because with that, They're going to be, and I want everybody to catch this, it's super important. You're going to have 28 pre-packaged shake meals within the detox kit. So it's going to be 2 per day for 14 days that we want you to get in your system. Every single time you drink one of those shakes, and tonight, how many had a sample of that? Did y'all like that pretty good? Very good. That's one of the detox shakes. And all we did, we put a little mango in there, a little bit of avocado. We kind of called our tropical detox. I don't know, just made it up tonight. It sounded pretty good and it tasted good too. We just made it up tonight. We thought, what are we going to put in it? Let's put some avocado and mango, And that was all vegan, which was pretty cool, right? Now, it's important to understand that when you take in a shake, and there's multiple ways to mix these things. It's not just water and make it gross. Fix it up, put stuff in. There's recipes there, and anything pretty much goes as long as it's a natural concept and not toxic, right? We're trying to get the system working well. There's also a pill pack that you're going to take each time you take a shake. Now, the pill pack has the nutrients that actually help out phase 1, giving it what it needs to be effective, and speed up phase 2, the very thing we want to do, right? So you're going to get a really nice pushing action here with this. There's 2 different styles. The Pure Paleo Cleanse Plus is a beef-based protein concoction. It has the same nutrients and things in them as the other one. The Veggie Cleanse is going to be the vegan one. So we have options for both, okay? You want to do this probably 3 to 4 times a year, so quarterly or every 4 months. Super important. Everybody needs to do this. What we really believe is that people will make a point to do this. It will set the tone for better lifestyle choices throughout the year. You get the idea. We need to make steps right now. It's a perfect time to do this. We thought about why to do this time of year. It's perfect because it's between Thanksgiving, where most people go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that dumb thing, and Christmas, where they go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to do that dumb thing. So you get the idea, right? So if you can do it now, it will get us thinking about that. Remember the original slide that talked about change? And when the pain of change, or pain of where you are outweighs the pain of change, you change. We need to avoid getting to that place and begin to change right now instead of waiting too long. Many people get woken up by an event. That doesn't need to be necessary. That doesn't need to be necessary. We need to get woke up by just inspiration and the wise.